Today I'm going to be sharing my experience with creating this watercolor painting on an Ampersand Aquabord panel. Hi, Shanna Rowe Jackson here from Caution Artists at Play, and I realized that I had jumped right into my project without giving you a view of what the panel looks like from the manufacturer, and this is what it looks like. This is a larger one than what I used in my project. I used an 8x10, but this is what you're going to be looking for if you are looking for one, if you like this video and decide to get one for yourself. This video is not sponsored by Ampersand or any of the companies mentioned, by the way. I bought all the products myself. So I want to show you a little bit. I kind of peeled back the corner a little, and hopefully you can see, hopefully it'll focus. There's some texture here. Get it to focus. Sometimes it helps like with the little shadow over it. But that's what the texture looks like. And let's talk a little bit about the claims to fame quickly before we get to our project. It is the amazing watercolor surface. It is absolutely archival. It is a textured clay surface that absorbs watercolors like a fine paper. Colors retain their purity and vibrance in a way that even the finest watercolor? What is watercolor? That even the finest watercolor paper can never match. And then they also say that it is brilliant color and unmatched techniques, get rich luminous color, and have complete control over your watercolors, endlessly glaze and lift to underlying layers of color or black and white, or back to white. And this is a biggie. They claim that you can frame it without glass. Watercolors on Aquabord can be sealed and displayed without glass, keeping colors and textures true to life. Superior hardboard backing will never tear, shrink, or buckle. So I think that's really interesting because usually when you work in watercolor on paper, it needs to be framed behind glass to keep it protected because obviously paper is a little bit more fragile. And a lot of times you need to use matting even. So it's kind of interesting that this can be sealed similarly to oil paintings and acrylic paintings and hung without glass. They also give us a helpful tip. For the best results, flush out the panel with water using a large flat watercolor brush to release trapped air in the surface. Once surface is slightly damp and it is ready to use, re-wetting may be necessary as you work. Note that heavy water applications may release more air. Use a blow dryer to dry and dissipate air. I never ended up using a blow dryer for mine. I just kind of waited it out a little and it seemed to be fine. Enjoy this new paper-like finish and create brilliant watercolors. So if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I love Ampersand panels, and I actually have used this product in the past, but it was quite a few years ago, and I don't believe I filmed my process. I think that I showed it in another video about Ampersand panels specifically, but not, like, I didn't get into the details of working on this particular panel. And so I wanted to do another one and see how it went so that I could film it for you so I could tell you more about this product. So I'm going to get into my project and I'm going to switch to voiceover and I will talk about what it was like to work on this panel. Okay, so on to the project now. I just want to put a little disclaimer out there that this is not a tutorial. I haven't worked with watercolors a ton lately. I've been mostly working with other water media like Inktense, and so I'm still kind of getting back in the swing of things with using a medium that lifts and isn't as permanent as Inktense. And so this is not a tutorial. This is more of a review of the panel itself and how it handles water media. So if that's what you're looking for, well, I'm sorry. But there's probably plenty of other artists online who can give you better tutorials on using watercolor specifically than me, at least until I am feeling a little bit more confident in my skills again. So let's talk about this panel. As mentioned, I flushed it out with water in the beginning, and you can actually kind of see in the areas of white where it's still a little bit wet. Because this is clay, I noticed that it kind of wet down the same way clay would. It had that same kind of look. So if you have, say, some air dry clay and you wet it down a little bit, it kind of had that same look to it. It was a little bit blotchy almost. It didn't seem to be very smooth. However, that wasn't an issue for me because I was working on a bokeh background. And so I didn't mind the blotchiness so much. And it talks about how the colors stay vibrant, and they definitely do. It works a little strange. I don't know how to explain it. It doesn't absorb the same way that paper does, and nor does the water sit on top the same way it does on watercolor paper. It's kind of hard to define, but it's fun. Like, mixing things around, it was fun. It was a little bit messier than usual and very highly saturated, which is something that I like because I'm so used to using things that are a bit more vibrant and saturated, like acrylics and ink tints. So I didn't mind that so much. But traditional watercolor artists, I'm not sure how they would feel about it. I think it's just going to be subjective. So while it does sort of mimic paper in the fact that it can take watercolor and even the texture kind of mimics paper, it is a little bit different than working with paper. Not in a bad way necessarily, it's just something that I found myself having to kind of work around a little bit, especially when I was trying to mix the colors smoothly in the background. Like I said, I was trying to get blotchiness in the background, but at the same time, there were some areas where I wanted the gradient to be smooth, and I was having a little bit of difficulty doing that because of the way the panel acts when it gets wet. I don't know how to explain it. It's not necessarily a bad thing, though. Again, part of that could be because I'm a little bit rusty and I'm not used to working with something that lifts so easily. And that is one of their claims. You can definitely lift on this, and that is really nice. And I was also able to glaze. It's kind of an anomaly here. So for the background, I went in mainly wet on wet for the first layer or two. I had masked off some of the smaller areas using my Molotow masking fluid pen. It worked great. It lifted fine. No complaints with the masking fluid on this panel. I was really, really happy with that. And then later on, as you can see, while I'm working, I kind of blot things out with paper towel to lift, and I come in with some Q-tips at some point to lift for some of those bokeh circles. And then I also come back in dry into wet later on to kind of glaze things a little bit. I mean, I don't use a lot of water when I do my second or third or fourth layers on this background because I don't want it to lift what's below. So I mean, watercolor's transparent as it is, so either way it ends up glazing, even though I'm not using a ton of water for those layers. Because when I did try to use more water for those layers, obviously it would lift a little bit more. So that's why you're kind of seeing me go back and forth here. But this is one big experiment for me because it's been a good few years since I've used this panel, so I didn't really remember the working properties. And before, it was a 5x7, and I honestly, I remember loving the experience, but I didn't remember what it was like to actually work on the panel. So it was like working on a whole new panel for me. And lately I've been using a lot of hot press watercolor paper, and I also have a cold pressed sketchbook that I've been using. And so working on something that's a little bit harder, like a harder surface, was a little different for me. That being said, I don't see these things as bad, and I want to try and use this panel again where I have to try to get smooth gradients just to see what the difference is. I think part of my issue was when I was flushing it out, I already had my sketch down and I had to be kind of aware of my sketch because my sketch was done in pastel pencil. And so that could very easily be washed away. And so I kind of had to wash it out in chunks, and that might have been part of the problem with some of the blotchiness. So like I said, next time I use this panel, I think I want to do something like a sky or something where I need to use more of a gradient and smoother washes just to see how that does. And, oh, I should mention, I'm using the Core watercolors and M. Graham watercolors. So these are artist grade watercolors, and they are a joy to work with. So one main plus that I want to talk about with this panel is the fact that since it's panel, I don't have to worry about buckling, I don't have to worry about stretching my paper, and I don't even have to tape it down, which I find to be very convenient because I like to move my artwork around so I can get at it from different angles, especially since I'm a lefty. So let's get to some of the claims of fame. The fact that I will be able to varnish this, I do know from before when I worked on this panel that I was able to do that. So I'm probably going to use a spray varnish. I'm going to at least have to do an isolation layer because obviously any other type of varnish that would brush on could move the paint around a little bit since watercolor lifts. So I'm probably going to use Karma varnish because I like it to be glossy, and that's one of my favorite varnishes. And that's what I used on the panel before. And I do find it to be extraordinarily exciting that we can use watercolor on panel. It is sturdy. It is going to be protected once it's sprayed. And that was just, I don't know, I think it's fabulous. I do think that there's also watercolor grounds out there that you can put on surfaces yourself. I believe that, oh, what is that company? Daniel Smith. Daniel Smith makes a watercolor ground so that you can paint on different surfaces. And I might try that for another video at some point. And then I want to apologize that there was a big chunk of footage missing. I was watching Netflix while I was doing this, and I didn't realize that the entire time I was painting the branch, it was off camera. And I was pretty disappointed and pretty PO'd by that. And so, yeah, that was really fun. So anyway, so let's get back to talking about the panel itself. The brilliant color and unmatched techniques. The color definitely is brilliant, and that is something that I have found on every ampersand surface that I have ever used. Somehow the colors come out way brighter and more saturated than I expect. And so I think that that is obviously a very big plus. And in my experience, they are definitely correct there. The fact that it is acid-free and archival, obviously that's always a plus. If you are creating artwork you want to last, you want to make sure that it is archival. But I really actually enjoyed myself. So aside from the blotchiness in the beginning, which again could be my rustiness with the medium, or it could just be the fact that I didn't flush it out completely correctly, I actually really thoroughly enjoyed this. And I do think that while it is not technically paper, I mean, it's not really supposed to be. It's supposed to improve upon paper. And so just with anything else, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve. And I felt like I was really starting to get the hang of it by the end of it. So I want to talk about something else that it really doesn't mention on the packaging, but I believe it mentions it online. And it's something that is really kind of a staple of our panels, and that's the fact that you can actually use scratchboard techniques on this panel. And you can use scratchboard techniques on most of their panels. It's really a plus side to it being some type of clay ground. You can scratch into it. And I found that to be amazing because I used that technique. I actually used some scratchboard tools on the branch. I use it in some of the feathers. I use it on the smaller branches and to get highlights in certain areas. And I just found that to be really, really exciting because there's just so many different ways you can experiment on this panel that you cannot experiment with on paper. Like, you can scratch into paper when it's wet using watercolor to get certain techniques, but you have to be very careful when you're scratching into paper because you obviously don't want to cut into the paper and go through it or damage it and cause bigger issues, whereas this is kind of made to be scratched into. And so while you're able to lift with water, you're also able to scratch away certain layers for fine details, and that is really, really exciting. I did use gouache. I'm not a purist, obviously. I am somebody who, as long as it's archival, I like to use whatever I can to make the painting be whatever I want it to be. So traditional watercolorists everywhere are probably watching this video and cringing at my techniques. And that's okay. I tried my best. I'm doing what I can here. But I definitely really just enjoyed myself. And that was something that I was trying to do with this painting anyways. I'm trying to let go of perfectionism a little, and so I wanted to do something that was going to step outside of my comfort zone, and I wanted to be a little bit more painterly, and so that's why I decided to go with watercolor. And I wanted to choose a panel that I'm not as experienced with so that I will make mistakes so that I can find ways to let them go. But also, mistakes are the way that you learn, and I do feel like I learned a lot about this. As I mentioned in my video about my 2021 goals, I wanted to work with watercolor more because I haven't really worked with it as much in recent years, other than in a lot of like illustrations and things like that, as I used to when I was younger. I used to have a lot more experience with watercolor. But I have been working more with colored pencil and acrylic lately, and ink tints, which tend to not lift as easily and tend to be more permanent. And so I wanted to kind of get back to regular watercolors. I've had these watercolors forever, and I want to put good use to them. And so that was kind of what this project was for. I wanted to try the panel again. I wanted to share my experience with you, because I do think that this is a really unique concept, to be able to take watercolor and paint on panel and have it be archival and sturdy, and I love that. So I want to talk about the texture of the panel a little bit. It is not quite smooth like hot press watercolor paper, nor is it as rough as cold press or rough paper. It's got kind of like a spackled kind of texture to it, and it's really interesting. There's just enough texture to hold on to the pigment and not have it be slick and slide all around the place, but smooth enough so that you can get fine detail, especially like if you're trying to do realism or something like that. I'd say overall I'm pretty happy with the texture of the panel itself. I think that it works really, really well for different kinds of applications of watercolor. I did some wet into wet, I did some wet into dry, I did some thinner glazes along with some, obviously, a little bit thicker watercolor, I guess I should say. Like, I added a little less water to get it to be more saturated. And as I mentioned, I was able to lift, and so I think overall the texture itself is really neat. It mimics paper, but it's not exactly like paper. It's its own unique thing, but I think it works really well. And I'm really, really happy with the results. Like, I can't really argue with the results. They came out better than I expected. I really didn't know what to expect, and I'm really, really pleased with the results of this. Again, it's not perfect. There are a few things that I see that I would like to adjust, but I'm trying not to because I wanted to let go of perfectionism a little bit. And I am working from my own reference photos here. I took some photos out in my backyard. I'm a crazy bird lady, and I used a combination of photos for the arrangement of branches and things like that, but the background and the bird and the main branch mainly come from one photo, and then the background branches I kind of made up as I went along using different reference photos. And actually the branch itself I embellished a little bit because I wanted it to be an old looking kind of rough branch, and the branch in my reference photo was a lot smoother. But I really, really am happy with the way the branch came out because I used a lot of imagination for that, and I'm really, really bummed that it's not on camera because I really wanted to show that to you. Mainly, I just put in my base layers of my lighter colors, and then I went in with the darker details, and I scratched some things out and used some gouache for that. Okay, so here is the tufted titmouse in all its glory, and I actually really enjoyed this experience, and I would recommend this panel. I had some struggles in the beginning, however, I pushed through, and I really, really enjoy it. It lifts well, the colors are vibrant. I used muted colors in this purposely, but they were beautiful, and I love the way they came out on this panel. And yeah, I would say that most of their claims are 100% true. You can definitely get vibrant colors. You can definitely lift back to white. It's just a little bit different than paper, obviously. So I recommend trying it. At the very least, try it for yourself and just see if you like it. All right, so thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.